Hi, I'm Riley. At age 17, my parents locked the fridge and called me dramatic when I collapsed at school. They thought I'd keep quiet like always. Then the ER doctor stormed into the courtroom, photos in hand, and testified. Severe malnutrition, he said. My parents' faces went paper white. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tuesday morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of courtroom 7B, casting striped shadows across my trembling hands. I smoothed the wrinkles of my borrowed dress, the fabric hanging loose where it once would have fit. The bailiff called my name, and I rose on legs still weak from months of recovery. My medical bracelet slid down my wrist, the plastic catching the light as I made my way to the witness stand. The courtroom smelled of lemon cleaner and nervous sweat. My social worker, Ms. Winters, nodded encouragement from the front row, her kind eyes never leaving mine as I took my seat. The judge, a woman with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, leaned forward. Please state your name for the record. Riley Morgan, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Across the aisle, my parents sat perfectly poised. Mom in her Sunday floral dress, Dad in his charcoal suit, the picture of middle-class respectability. They'd styled themselves as concerned parents, victims of a troubled teen's lies. Mom dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue while Dad stared straight ahead, jaw locked in practiced concern. My younger brother Ethan fidgeted beside them, 13 and confused, eyes darting between us like he was watching a tennis match he never asked to attend. I caught his gaze for just a moment before he looked away, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of divided loyalty. My attorney, Ms. Reeves, approached. With measured steps. Riley, can you tell the court when the food restrictions began? I swallowed hard, feeling the spotlight of 40 strangers bearing witness to what had happened behind our perfect front door. It started small, around my 14th birthday. Portions got smaller. Snacks disappeared. Mom said she was teaching me about nutrition. 3 years ago. 3 years of shrinking meals and growing hunger. The memory of standing before our refrigerator, new combination lock glinting on the handle, made my stomach clench even now. And what happened when you asked for more food? They said I was being dramatic. That I was manipulative. That real hunger feels different. I paused, fingers twisting in my lap. Dad said I needed to learn self-control. From the corner of my eye, I saw Dad shift in his seat, straightening his tie as if adjusting armor. Mom's face remained smooth as marble, eyes fixed on some point above my head. The perfect Morgans of Maple Street, pillars of the community, PDA president and bank manager, their carefully constructed image beginning to crack beneath fluorescent lights. Ms. Reeves nodded toward the evidence table. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit C, the food journal Riley was required to keep. The bailiff handed the spiral notebook to the judge. My handwriting crawled across those pages, documenting every morsel, every calorie, every ounce of water. Beside each entry, my mother's red pen marks, excessive, unnecessary, attention-seeking. Riley, what happened when you didn't follow these restrictions? My throat tightened. They'd lock the pantry. Or add another day without dinner. Sometimes Dad would make me run laps around the neighborhood to earn breakfast. The prosecutor approached next, a tall woman with kind eyes and a voice that carried to the back row. Ms. Morgan, when did you first tell someone outside your home about the food situation? I stared at my hands, shame burning hot despite everything I now understood about what they'd done. I didn't, not really. My English teacher, Mrs. Bennett, noticed I kept falling asleep in class. She asked if I was eating enough. I just said I was on a special diet. And why didn't you tell her the truth? The question hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. Why hadn't I spoken up? Why had I protected the very people who were harming me? Because they convinced me it was normal, I finally said. That I was the problem. That no one would believe me anyway. Across the room, my former best friend Zoe sat with her mother, eyes wide. We drifted apart during sophomore year when I stopped coming to lunch, stopped having energy for after-school hangouts. Now she knew why. The realization painted her face with a mixture of guilt and horror. What changed, Riley? The prosecutor continued. What finally brought this situation to light? The memory flashed bright and sharp, the school track, early March, my vision tunneling to black as my legs gave way beneath me. I'd been running on nothing but water and half an apple for nearly 2 days. I collapsed during PE, I said, my voice dropping. My blood sugar was so low I had a seizure. The school called an ambulance instead of my parents. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the gallery, someone gasped softly. And what did the emergency room doctors find? Severe malnutrition. Electrolyte imbalance. Early organ damage. Each diagnosis fell like stones between us. I weighed 92 pounds. I'm 5'7". The prosecutor nodded, then moved to the evidence table. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit D. The bailiff carried forward a large envelope. The prosecutor removed several photographs, approaching the bench first, then my attorney, then the defense. My parents' lawyer grimaced, shaking his head slightly. These are the medical photographs taken upon Riley's admission to Westlake Memorial Hospital on March 7. The first photo appeared on the courtroom monitor. A clinical shot of a girl in a hospital gown, arms like twigs, collarbones sharp as coat hangers, cheeks hollowed beneath dull eyes. Me, but barely recognizable. Several jurors turned away. One older woman pressed her hand to her mouth. My mother finally looked at me then, her mask slipping just enough to reveal something I'd never seen before: fear. The judge studied the images, her professional composure cracking for just a moment. She removed her glasses, pinched the bridge of her nose, and took a deep breath before continuing. The court will take a 15-minute recess, she announced, voice tight with controlled emotion. As the room emptied, Ms. Winters approached, offering a small bottle of water and a granola bar from her purse. You're doing great, she whispered. Just tell your truth. Truth. Such a simple word for something so complicated. The truth was I had loved my parents even as they'd starved me. The truth was I'd believed them when they said my hunger was greed, my weakness was failure. The truth was that even now, part of me wondered if I was overreacting, if I was being dramatic, just as they'd always said. When court resumed, my father took the stand. He sat ramrod straight, the picture of wronged dignity. We were helping her, he insisted, voice smooth as river stones. Riley has always had issues with food. We were teaching her moderation, healthy choices. Their attorney, a man with expensive cufflinks and rehearsed concern, nodded sympathetically. And the lock on the refrigerator? A necessary step, Dad replied. She would binge at night. We were protecting her from herself. I dug my nails into my palms until they left half-moon imprints. How easily he rewrote our history, turning cruelty into care, control into concern. When it was Mom's turn, she dabbed at dry eyes again, voice trembling with performed emotion. Riley has always been prone to exaggeration. Her teachers will tell you. She makes up stories for attention. We never denied her proper nutrition. This is all just a terrible misunderstanding. A terrible misunderstanding. As if my body had somehow misunderstood the lack of food. As if my organs had exaggerated their slow failure. After Mom stepped down, the prosecution called their final witness. Dr. Abernathy entered in wrinkled scrubs, clearly having come straight from the hospital. He carried a thick medical file and the weary determination of someone who'd seen too many broken children. Dr. Abernathy, as the attending physician when Riley Morgan was admitted, can you describe her condition? He opened the file, though he hardly needed it. Riley was experiencing acute malnutrition consistent with long-term caloric restriction. Blood work showed dangerously low potassium levels, anemia, and early signs of organ dysfunction. Her heart rate was below 40 beats per minute. And in your expert opinion, could this condition have been caused by, as the defendants claim, a teenager's voluntary diet or eating disorder? Dr. Abernathy's gaze swept over my parents, his professional demeanor barely containing his contempt. Absolutely not. The pattern of malnutrition, combined with the locked food storage documented by social services, indicates systematic restriction imposed externally. Moreover, Riley's journal entries show she was begging for food, not refusing it. He turned toward the jury, voice steady and certain. This young woman was starved, deliberately and consistently, over a period of years. Had she not received medical intervention when she did, we would likely be discussing a fatality. The word fatality rippled through the courtroom like a stone dropped in still water. Even my father's composure faltered. During closing arguments, my parents' attorney spoke of misguided but well-intentioned parenting, of a troubled teen misinterpreting tough love. My prosecutor spoke of calculated abuse, of parents who had weaponized the most basic human need against their own child. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts of child endangerment, negligence, and abuse, Mom finally broke. Her perfect mask crumbled as she sobbed into her hands. Dad remained stone-faced, even as the bailiff approached with handcuffs. I didn't feel the triumph I'd expected. Just a hollow ache where hunger had lived. For so long. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered with microphones and cameras. My social worker shielded me from their questions, guiding me toward the waiting car. But before we reached it, I heard my name called in a small, uncertain voice. Ethan stood by a stone pillar, our aunt's hand on his shoulder. My little brother, caught in the crossfire of a war he never started. Riley? He took a step forward, then another, until he was close enough for me to see the freckles across his nose, the same ones I had. Are you coming home? Home. The word tasted strange now, disconnected from any place I'd ever known. Not to that house, I said softly. But we'll still see each other. I promise. He nodded, eyes shining with unshed tears. They didn't do it to me. The food thing. I didn't know they were doing it to you. I would have helped. I believed him. Ethan had been kept in the dark, another tactic in their campaign of isolation. He'd eaten normal meals, often in separate rooms from me. Another way to make me feel alone, different, broken. I know, buddy. I reached out, squeezed his hand. It wasn't your job to help. You're just a kid. So were you, he whispered. That night, in my temporary room at Ms. Winter's house, I sat by the window watching rain trace patterns down the glass. On the nightstand stood a small basket of snacks, granola bars, fruit, crackers, that she refreshed daily. Anytime you're hungry, she told me when I arrived. No permission needed. Such a simple thing, the right to eat when hungry. Such a basic freedom I was only now relearning. My phone buzzed with messages from classmates who'd seen the news. Some offered support. Others asked invasive questions wrapped in concern. I set it aside, too exhausted to navigate their curiosity. Instead, I opened the journal my therapist had suggested. Unlike the food diary my parents had forced me to keep, this one was private, a space for truths I was only beginning to unearth. I wrote about the verdict. About Ethan's face outside the courthouse. About the strange emptiness of justice served. And then, for the first time, I wrote about the day everything changed, the day hunger became my constant companion. It had been my 14th birthday. Mom had baked a chocolate cake, my favorite. But when I reached for a second slice, her hand clamped around my wrist, fingers digging into bone. Careful, Riley, she'd said, voice honey sweet but eyes cold. You're getting a little heavy for dance team tryouts, don't you think? I'd looked down at my body, suddenly seeing it through her critical gaze. Had I gained weight? Was that why my leotard felt tighter last week? I just want you to be successful, she continued, taking the plate away. No one wants to watch a heavy dancer. That night, I'd stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, pinching at perfectly normal adolescent softness, seeing flaws that didn't exist. The next morning, breakfast was half what it used to be. The beginning of a slow vanishing. Dad had supported her completely. Your mother knows what's best, he'd say whenever I complained of hunger. Stop being dramatic, Riley. There are children starving in the world. You don't know what real hunger is. But I would learn. Oh, how I would learn. The restrictions. Tighten like a noose. Meals became tiny, meticulously measured affairs. A quarter cup of oatmeal for breakfast. 5 carrot sticks for lunch. A palm-sized portion of protein for dinner, always accompanied by a recitation of calories and proper nutrition facts. By 15, I was keeping the food journal. By 16, the locks appeared. First on the pantry, then the refrigerator. Combinations changed weekly, sometimes daily, a twisted game of keep away with sustenance. It's for your own good, Mom would insist when I begged. You have no self-control. I stopped bringing friends home, embarrassed by the locks, by the growling of my stomach, by my increasingly bony appearance that drew concerned looks from teachers and whispers from classmates. Dance became impossible as my energy vanished. When I quit the team, Mom called me a quitter. When my grades slipped as concentration became impossible, Dad called me lazy. When I fell asleep at the dinner table after eating 3 bites of plain chicken, they said I was being disrespectful. And still, I believed them. Believed there was something fundamentally wrong with me, something that justified their actions. Believed their narrative that my body was the problem, my hunger the enemy, my weakness the failure. The night before I collapsed at school, I'd stood in our kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at the locked refrigerator, so hungry I could barely think. I'd tried using a butter knife to pry it open, desperate enough to risk punishment. Dad had caught me, his footsteps silent on the tile floor. This is exactly why we need the lock, he'd said, voice flat with disappointment. No breakfast tomorrow. Maybe hunger will teach you what we can't. The irony of his words struck me now as I wrote them down. Hunger had indeed taught me something. Just not what they'd intended. It had taught me that some parents break rather than build. That love, when twisted enough, becomes indistinguishable from cruelty. My therapist said writing it all down would help release it. But as I filled page after page, the memories didn't feel lighter. They felt more real, more undeniable. No longer could I minimize or excuse what had happened. No longer could I pretend. It had been normal. I closed the journal and turned toward the bedside table. Without thinking, I reached for a granola bar, unwrapped it, and took a bite. No permission asked. No calories counted. Just hunger acknowledged and met with food, the most basic equation of survival. Outside, rain continued falling, washing streets clean. Inside, I chewed slowly, savoring each bite, reclaiming something small but vital, the simple right to feed my hunger. Tomorrow would bring more court dates, custody hearings for Ethan, therapy appointments, and the long road of recovery. But tonight, in this quiet room with rain tapping against the window, and food freely available at my fingertips, I allowed myself to believe that healing was possible. Not just for my body, which the doctors said would eventually recover, but for the deeper wounds, the ones that had convinced me I deserved to disappear, that my needs were excessive, that my voice wasn't worth hearing. I finished the granola bar and reached for an apple, the decision itself an act of quiet rebellion against years of deprivation. Each bite a small declaration: I am here. I matter. I deserve to exist fully in this body. And for the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar but essential unfurling in my chest, not fullness, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first fragile roots of hope taking hold in soil I'd thought barren. The next morning, I woke to sunshine streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, disorientation gripped me. Where were the water stains on my ceiling, the crack in the wall I'd traced with my finger on countless hungry nights? Then reality settled. Courtroom. Verdict: Ms. Winter's spare bedroom. Freedom. The smell of breakfast cooking drifted upstairs. Not the meager oatmeal that had been my only morning meal for years, but something rich and warm. Eggs, maybe. Toast. My stomach growled in anticipation, no longer a sound of shame but simply my body speaking its truth. I dressed in borrowed clothes, still too big but less noticeable now after weeks of proper nutrition in the hospital and foster care. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection showed the first hints of recovery: cheeks less hollow, eyes clearer, hair regaining some shine. Still too thin, still bearing the marks of years of starvation, but slowly reclaiming territory. Downstairs, Ms. Winters stood at the stove flipping pancakes, her gray hair pulled into a messy bun. Morning, sunshine, she called without turning. Hungry? Such a simple question. Such a complicated history behind my answer. Yes, I said, the word still feeling dangerous in my mouth. I am. She smiled over her shoulder. Good. That's good, Riley. Plates in the cabinet, syrup on the table. Help yourself to whatever looks good. Help yourself. No permission needed, no portions measured, no calories counted. Just food, freely offered. I set the table while she finished cooking, the domestic normalcy of it almost overwhelming. When was the last time I'd participated in a morning routine that didn't involve restriction and rules? You've got that appointment with Dr. Chen at 11, Ms. Winters reminded me as we ate. And your caseworker wants to meet for lunch after to discuss the permanent placement options. Permanent placement. At 17, I straddled an awkward line, too old for traditional adoption, too young to be completely on my own. The court had terminated my parents' rights temporarily, pending the outcome of their criminal case, but everyone knew it was just a formality. They wouldn't regain custody. What about Ethan? I asked, the question that had dominated my thoughts since the verdict. Ms. Winters' face softened. Your Aunt Julie has filed for temporary custody. The hearing's next week. You're on the witness list, if you feel up to it. Aunt Julie was Mom's younger sister, the family rebel who'd moved to Colorado years ago after a falling out I never fully understood. She'd flown in for the trial, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom each day. Unlike my mother, her expressions had been transparent: shock, grief, anger, as the evidence mounted. I want to testify, I said firmly. Ethan deserves a safe home. Ms. Winters nodded. Speaking of safe homes, there's something I want to discuss with you. She set down her fork, expression turning serious. My husband and I, we've been foster parents for 20 years. Mostly emergency placements, teenagers who need somewhere stable while the system works things out. I nodded. I knew this about her, it was why the court had placed me with her after the hospital. We're not looking to adopt, she continued. At our age, that wouldn't make sense. But we'd like to offer you what they call a permanent foster placement. You'd stay with us until you graduate, maybe through college if you wanted. No pressure to see us as parents, God knows you've had enough of that, but a stable home, for as long as you need it. The pancake turned to paste in my mouth. I reached for water, buying time as emotions collided inside me. Gratitude, fear, disbelief. Why? I finally managed. You barely know me. Ms. Winters smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. I know enough, Riley. I know you're remarkably strong. I know you deserve stability. And I know my husband and I have an empty nest and plenty of love to spare. Later, in Dr. Chen's office, I tried to process this offer. Dr. Chen was the psychiatrist. who'd been working with me since the hospital, a woman with calm hands and a quiet voice who never seemed shocked by anything I told her. "How do you feel about Ms. Winter's offer?" she asked, after I'd related the morning's conversation. I stared at the potted plant beside her desk, its leaves reaching confidently toward the sunlight. "Confused," I admitted. "Grateful but scared." "Scared is understandable. Trust has been broken for you, repeatedly and fundamentally. What if I do something wrong? What if they change their minds?" Dr. Chen's pen paused above her notepad. "That's the voice of your trauma speaking, Riley. The one that was trained to believe love is conditional, that your worth depends on perfect behavior." She was right, of course. Years of walking on eggshells had left me hypervigilant, constantly scanning for signs of disapproval. Always braced for punishment. Your parents created an environment where basic necessities became rewards to be earned. Or withheld, Dr. Chen continued. That distorts your perception of all relationships. Part of your healing will be recognizing that healthy love doesn't operate that way. I thought about Ms. Winter's breakfast table. The simple invitation. To take what I needed, no ledger kept, no debt accrued. "It's hard to believe I deserve it," I whispered. "Just normal kindness." "That's where we'll start then," Dr. Chen said, making a note. "With the radical notion that you deserve to have your basic needs met without having to earn them." After therapy, my caseworker, Marco, picked me up for our lunch meeting. Unlike many of the overworked social workers in the system, Marco had somehow maintained his energetic optimism. Today he arrived with a folder of documents and a determined expression. "Good news," he announced as we settled into a booth at the diner. "The judge is fast-tracking Ethan's placement with your aunt. The home study looks great." Relief flooded through me. Ethan would be safe. "There's more," Marco continued, pulling papers from his folder. "Your school records. Despite everything, your GPA is still decent. With some summer catch-up, you could graduate on time next year." The waitress arrived to take our orders. "Marco asked for a burger." I hesitated, the old voice whispering that I should order something small, something low-calorie, something that wouldn't draw attention. "The French toast looks good," I said instead, silencing that voice. "With extra syrup, please." Marco grinned, catching the significance of the moment. "And a side of bacon," he added with a wink. As we waited for our food, he spread more papers on the table. "Now for the complicated part. Your parents' assets." My stomach tightened. "I don't want their money." "I understand that feeling. Believe me. But here's the thing, they financially abused you along with everything else. That house, those savings accounts, the college fund they kept threatening to withhold? All of that was partially meant for your care and education." He slid a document across the table. "The prosecutor is pushing for restitution as part of the sentencing. Medical costs, therapy, education expenses. You're entitled to that." The thought of taking anything from them made my skin crawl. Yet another part of me recognized the justice in it, repayment for years of deprivation. "Think about it," Marco said gently. "You don't have to decide today." Our food arrived, plates steaming. I stared at the golden French toast, drowning in syrup, more calories in one meal than I'd been allowed in days under my parents' control. The old fear whispered, "You'll get fat, you'll be worthless, you'll be punished." I picked up my fork, took a deliberate bite, and let the sweetness dissolve on my tongue. A small victory. "There's one more thing," Marco said, pulling a slim manila envelope from his folder. "This arrived at the department this morning." I wiped sticky fingers on a napkin before taking it. Inside was a handwritten letter on crisp stationery. "It's from your dance teacher, Ms. Harlow," Marco explained. "She saw the news." I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. Ms. Harlow had been my instructor from ages 9 through 15, until the restrictions at home made dance impossible. I'd disappeared from her studio without explanation, too ashamed to admit the truth. "Dear Riley," the letter began. "Words cannot express my shock and sorrow at learning what you've endured. As your teacher for 6 years, I should have recognized the signs. When you stopped coming to class, I accepted your mother's explanation. That you'd simply lost interest. I failed you, and for that, I am profoundly sorry." Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. "You were one of my most promising students. The joy you brought to movement was extraordinary. Dance should have been your sanctuary, not another thing taken from you. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, there will always be a place for you at Harlow Studio. Not as a student, unless that's what you want, but perhaps as an assistant teacher for the younger classes. Dance can be reclaimed, just like your health and your future. With deep regret and hope for your healing, Catherine Harlow." I folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into its envelope. Something cracked open inside me, not just grief for what I'd lost, but possibility. The idea that parts of my former self could be recovered, repurposed, reborn. You okay? Marco asked, concern creasing his forehead. I think I might be, I answered, surprising myself with the honesty of it. Someday. That evening, I sat in Ms. Winter's backyard, watching fireflies rise from the grass like earthbound stars. The warm June air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and distant rain. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Julie, just confirmed with the lawyer. Hearing set for Tuesday. Ethan says hi. A flutter of hope. My brother wouldn't disappear from my life after all. Another text followed, this one from Zoe, my former best friend. Can we talk sometime? I miss you. I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening. I stared at her message, uncertain how to respond. There had been clues, of course, my declining invitations to lunch, the excuses about already eating, the baggy clothes hiding my shrinking frame. But my parents had been masters of deflection. When teachers raised concerns, Mom volunteered more at school. When friends asked questions, Dad coached me on what to say. Their reputation in the community had been a perfect shield, their outward normalcy the perfect cover. Could I blame Zoe for believing the lie when I'd helped tell it? Ms. Winters stepped onto the patio, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to me, then settled into the adjacent chair, respecting my space while offering companionship. Penny for your thoughts, she said after a comfortable silence. I was just thinking about forgiveness, I replied. Who deserves it? Who doesn't? She nodded, blowing ripples across her tea. Complicated territory. My friend Zoe wants to talk. She feels guilty for not noticing. I turn the phone in my hands. Part of me thinks, how could you not see? But then, I didn't want anyone to see. I was so ashamed. Shame is a powerful silencer, Ms. Winters murmured. It convinces us we're alone, that no one would understand. Do you think I should forgive her? She considered this, her expression thoughtful. I think that's entirely up to you, Riley. Forgiveness isn't an obligation. It's a choice, and sometimes, it's a process. You can forgive someone gradually, in pieces, as you're ready. What about my parents? The question escaped before I could catch it, hanging between us in the firefly-dotted dusk. Ms. Winters set her mug down carefully. That's a much bigger question, one you don't need to answer now, or next month, or even next year. Some actions may never deserve forgiveness, and that's okay too. Your healing doesn't depend on forgiving them. Her words settled over me like a blanket, warm and protective. For so long, I'd carried the weight of my parents' actions as if their choices were somehow my responsibility. As if I needed to find understanding for the unforgivable. Perhaps the most radical act wasn't forgiveness at all, but permission to hold others accountable for their actions, permission to prioritize my own healing, permission to decide what relationships deserved space in my reclaimed life. I took a sip of tea, letting its warmth spread through me. I think I'm going to meet with Zoe. Not right away, but soon. Ms. Winters smiled. That sounds like a thoughtful choice. That night, I dreamed of the hospital. Not the frightening parts, the needles, the feeding tubes, the constant monitoring, but the moment 3 days into my stay when a nurse named Dawn had sat beside my bed, holding a small container of applesauce. Just 1 spoonful, she'd encouraged. Then rest. Then another when you're ready. 1 spoonful. Rest. Another. The slow, patient process of nourishment after starvation. Perhaps healing followed the same rhythm. 1 truth acknowledged. Rest. Another step forward when ready. In the morning, I woke to the unfamiliar sound of my own laughter. Ms. Winters' cat, an orange tabby named Chairman Meow, had somehow opened my door and now sat on my chest, whiskers twitching with expectation. Well, hello, I whispered, reaching up to scratch behind his ears. Didn't anyone tell you I'm not a morning person? The cat merely purred, settling more firmly in place as if to say this detail was irrelevant to his agenda. For a moment, I just lay there, savoring the simple joy of an animal's uncomplicated affection. Chairman Meow didn't care about my past or my problems. He wanted nothing from me except perhaps breakfast and the occasional ear scratch. His presence demanded nothing except acknowledgement. How strange to be wanted simply for being present, not for what I could do or how I could perform or whether I met some impossible standard. I carried that feeling with me to the kitchen, where I found a note from Ms. Winters, early meeting. Help yourself to breakfast. Back by 3. Help yourself. Those words again, still strange, still revolutionary. I opened the refrigerator, unlocked, accessible, abundant, and stood before it, allowing myself to feel hungry, to identify what I wanted, to reach for it without fear or calculation. Simple acts that weren't simple at all. After breakfast, I called Marco to confirm our appointment to visit Ethan later that day. Then, gathering courage I wasn't sure I possessed, I replied to Zoe's text, coffee at Bluebird Cafe tomorrow? 2 p.m.? Her response came immediately, I'll be there. Thank you. The hours until our visit with Ethan stretched before me, empty of obligation. Another unfamiliar freedom, unstructured time. At home, every minute had been accounted for, monitored, judged. Now the day waited, open with possibility. I found myself wandering into Ms. Winter's small home office, drawn to the bookshelf that lined one wall. Titles on psychology, trauma, healing. Fiction of every genre. Poetry collections. My fingers trailed over spines, stopping at one titled, Reclaiming Your Voice, Healing from Emotional Abuse. Without overthinking it, I pulled the book from the shelf and curled up in the window seat overlooking the garden. The first chapter opened with words that caught my breath. The most insidious aspect of emotional abuse is how it teaches victims to continue the abuse long after the abuser is gone. We internalize their voice, their judgments, their restrictions, until we no longer need them present to maintain our own captivity. I read until my eyes burned, until the shadows shifted across the floor, until Chairman Meow appeared to headbutt my ankle in what I'd come to recognize as his lunch reminder. Page after page described experiences so similar to mine that it sometimes felt like reading my own diary. Gaslighting. Isolation. Food restriction as control. The systematic dismantling of self-worth. Each term giving name and form to what I'd experienced, pulling the shapeless darkness of my past into defined patterns that could be understood, examined, and ultimately, healed. By the time Marco arrived to take me to see Ethan, I'd filled a notebook page with quotes, questions, and realizations. The book tucked safely back on the shelf, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside into the warm afternoon, feeling lighter than I had in days. Ready to see your brother? Marco asked as I buckled into his Honda. More than ready, I replied, meaning it completely. We drove through familiar neighborhoods toward the temporary foster home where Ethan was staying until Aunt Julie's custody hearing. The roads hadn't changed, but I viewed them differently now, no longer as the boundaries of a prison but simply streets leading somewhere else. Ethan was waiting on the front porch when we pulled up, bouncing on his toes with barely contained energy. He raced down the steps as I climbed out of the car, stopping just short of colliding with me. Riley, he exclaimed, then hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Kanukyo? They said I should ask first because of, everything. My heart squeezed. Even at 13, he was learning to respect boundaries. Yes, buddy. Hugs are always okay from you. He threw his arms around me, still small enough that his head tucked perfectly under my chin. I held him carefully, feeling the warmth of him, solid and real and somehow unbroken despite everything. I missed you, he mumbled against my shoulder. Missed you too, squirt. I ruffled his hair, the familiar gesture a bridge between our past and this uncertain present. His foster mother, Mrs. Rodriguez, invited us inside. Unlike Ms. Winter's cozy craftsman, the Rodriguez home hummed with activity, two small children coloring at the dining table, a teenager playing video games. In the living room, the smell of something savory simmering in the kitchen. You kids can use the back porch, Mrs. Rodriguez offered, pointing us toward a screened-in space with wicker furniture and potted plants. I'll bring some lemonade. Ethan led the way, clearly comfortable in this temporary home. Once settled on the porch swing, he studied me with the direct gaze of someone too young to hide his thoughts. You look better, he said finally. Not so see-through. I smiled at his description. Hospital food. Turns out 3 meals a day works wonders. His expression darkened. I didn't know, Riley. About the locks when I wasn't home. About the food journal. I swear. I know that, You were just a kid. I paused, realizing how that sounded. You're still just a kid. But you were just a kid too. His voice cracked slightly. When they started doing it to you. The simple truth of his words hit harder than any testimony in the courtroom. I had been just a kid, 14, awkward, growing, normal, when my parents began systematically starving me. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared with a tray of lemonade and cookies, setting it on the small table before tactfully retreating. Ethan immediately grabbed 2 cookies, then froze, glancing at me with sudden uncertainty. It's okay, I assured him. Eat whatever you want. He bit into a cookie, watching me. Are you allowed to eat these now? The question broke my heart a little. Even Ethan had been trained to think of food as something I needed permission to consume. I'm allowed to eat anything I want, I said, taking a cookie to demonstrate. What happened wasn't because I needed special food rules, Ethan. It was because Mom and Dad were wrong. Very wrong. He nodded slowly. That's what my therapist said. Dr. Mike says they used food as a way to control you, and that's abuse. My throat tightened hearing my brother say the word so matter-of-factly. Abuse. Not tough love or discipline or helping, the words my parents had used to disguise their cruelty. Dr. Mike is right, I managed. And I want you to know that what's happening now, Mom and Dad being punished, you going to live with Aunt Julie, it's not your fault. None of this is your fault. I know. He took a sip of lemonade. But sometimes I feel bad that I got normal meals and you didn't. Like, why did they pick you to hurt and not me? It was the question I'd asked myself countless times during sleepless nights. Why me? What made me the target of their particular brand of control? I don't think we'll ever really know, I said honestly. Maybe because I was older, or because I started looking more like Mom as a teenager. Maybe they saw something in me they wanted to control. But Ethan, I'm glad it wasn't you. I would have done anything to protect you. Like how you didn't tell anybody? To protect us being a family? His perception startled me. Yeah, something like that. But I was wrong, I should have told someone sooner. He considered this, swinging his legs beneath the porch swing. Aunt Julie says sometimes the bravest thing is asking for help. Aunt Julie sounds pretty smart, I smiled. Are you okay with going to live with her? His face brightened. She's cool. She has a dog named Einstein and she doesn't care if I play video games as long as I finish homework first. And she says you can visit whenever you want. Relief washed through me. At least one thing was working out. What about you? He asked. Where will you live after everything? I told him about Ms. Winter's offer of permanent foster care until college. About potentially returning to school in the fall. About the possibility of assistant teaching at my old dance studio. So you might dance again? Ethan perked up. You were really good. I remember watching your recitals. The memory surfaced. Ethan, maybe 7 at the time, presenting me with slightly crushed flowers after a performance. Before the restrictions, before hunger became my constant companion, before dance became just another thing I couldn't do because my body was too weak, too dizzy, too broken. Maybe, I said. I'm not sure my body remembers how anymore. Bodies remember stuff, he said with the certainty of youth. Like how I still remember how to ride a bike even though I haven't done it in forever. His simple faith warmed something in me. Maybe he was right. Maybe some joys could be reclaimed, muscle memory awakening after long dormancy. As the afternoon light softened, Marco appeared to drive me back to Ms. Winters. Saying goodbye to Ethan was harder than I expected, even knowing I'd see him again soon. Text me every day, he asked, hugging me one last time. Promise, I replied, memorizing the feel of his arms around me, the subtle scent of boyhood, grass and fruit snacks and the faint hint of whatever video game-themed shampoo he was currently obsessed with. On the drive back, Marco updated me on the case. Your parents' sentencing is scheduled for next week. The prosecutor is asking for maximum penalties. I stared out the window at passing houses, each one a mystery of what happened behind closed doors. What will that mean, exactly? Given the severity and duration of the abuse, probably significant jail time. 5 years minimum. And permanent termination of parental rights. 5 years. By the time they were released, I would be well into adulthood. College, perhaps. A life built far from their influence. Do I have to be there? For the sentencing? Marco shook his head. Only if you want to provide a victim impact statement. Otherwise, the evidence already presented is sufficient. Victim impact statement. A chance to tell the court, to tell them what their actions had done to me. The thought made my stomach clench. I'll think about it, I said quietly. That night, I helped Ms. Winters prepare dinner, chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, measuring rice, setting the table for 3. Her husband Roy, a retired literature professor with kind eyes and a fondness for bad puns, joined us after finishing his crossword puzzle. The normalcy of the meal, passing dishes, casual conversation, second helpings offered without comment, still felt foreign, like visiting a country where I didn't quite speak the language. But I was learning. Bite by bite, meal by meal. I was learning that food could be simply nourishment, not a battlefield. After dinner, I worked up the courage to ask about the book I'd found in their office. Of course you can borrow it, Ms. Winters said immediately. In fact, I have several others you might find helpful. And if you're interested, there's a support group for survivors of family abuse that meets at the community center on Thursdays. The word survivors caught me off guard. Is that what I was now? A survivor? It seemed too strong a word for simply existing through what had happened to me. Yet the alternative, victim, felt too passive, too defining. I'm not sure I'm ready for a group, I admitted. But maybe someday. No rush, she assured me. Healing isn't a race. Later, curled up with the borrowed book and Chairman Meow purring beside me, I contemplated the word survivor again. It implied something active, something strong. It suggested making it through to the other side of something terrible. Was there another side to this? Could I truly move beyond what my parents had done, or would I always be defined by those years of systematic starvation, of having my most basic needs weaponized against me? The next day brought my coffee meeting with Zoe. I arrived early at Bluebird Cafe, choosing a small table near the window where I could watch for her approach. Ordering felt like a small victory, a mocha with whipped cream, something my mother would have deemed excessive and unnecessary. Zoe arrived exactly at 2, her familiar bouncy walk visible through the window before she entered. She spotted me immediately, her steps faltering slightly before she squared her shoulders and approached. "Riley," she said, voice catching. "Thank you for meeting me." I gestured to the chair across from me. "Would you like something to drink?" "My treat." She ordered a chai latte, then sat fidgeting with her bracelet, a friendship bracelet I'd made her in 8th grade, I realized with a start. She'd kept it all this time. "I don't even know where to begin," she said finally. "I've rehearsed what to say 100 times, but now nothing seems right." "You don't have to say anything." "Perfect," I assured her. "I didn't agree to meet because I want some perfect apology." "Why did you agree, then?" I considered the question honestly. "Because we were friends for 10 years before everything fell apart. Because you're part of my history that isn't painful. And maybe because I'm trying to figure out who I am now. And you knew me before." She nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I should have known something was wrong. When you stopped coming to lunch, when you got so thin, when you always had excuses for why you couldn't hang out. I thought maybe you were just growing away from me, finding new friends. That's what my parents wanted everyone to think. They were very careful about how they presented things to the outside world. But I was your best friend." Her voice cracked. "I should have pushed harder, asked more questions." "Zoe," I leaned forward. "I didn't want anyone to know. I was so ashamed. I thought if I just tried harder, ate less, became what they wanted, things would get better." I pushed you away deliberately. "The teachers should have noticed," she insisted. "Coach Williams, Ms. Harlow, someone should have reported it." Some did have concerns. My parents were very good at explanations. Health conditions, growth spurts, teenage diets. I stirred my mocha. And they were respected in the community. No one wanted to believe they were starving their daughter. Sometimes I still struggled to believe it myself. The magnitude of what they'd done seemed impossible, especially juxtaposed with memories of earlier childhood, birthday cakes, Sunday dinners, picnics in the park. How had those same parents decided that controlling my body through starvation was acceptable? Zoe reached across the table, hesitant, her fingers stopping just short of mine. I saw the trial coverage. The hospital photos. "Riley, I'm so sorry." "I know." I bridged the gap, squeezing her hand briefly. "It's not your fault, Zoe. It was never your job to save me. Would it be possible to be friends again? Not like before, I know too much has happened, but something new?" The question hung between us, weighted with shared history and divergent paths. Could we build something new from the ruins of our teenage friendship? "I'd like to try," I said finally. "But slowly. I'm still figuring out a lot of things." Her smile was wobbly but genuine. "Slow is good. I can do slow." We spent the next hour cautiously circling around lighter topics, classes she was taking, colleges she was considering, mutual acquaintances from school. Normal teenage conversations. That felt simultaneously foreign and achingly familiar. When we parted outside the cafe, her hug was gentle, careful. "Text me whenever," she said. "Even if it's just to say hi." "I will," I promised, and meant it. Walking back to Ms. Winter's house, I felt strangely lighter. Not healed, that would take far more than one coffee date, but perhaps beginning to reconnect with pieces of myself that had been buried beneath years of survival. The weekend passed in a blur of appointments, medical checkups, therapy sessions, meetings with Marco about the upcoming legal proceedings. My weight had increased. Slightly, though Dr. Chen warned it would be a long, gradual process to reach true health. "Your body is still in survival mode," she explained during my checkup. "It's going to take time to convince it that food is consistently available now." On Sunday evening, I sat at Ms. Winter's kitchen table, a blank sheet of paper before me. After days of consideration, I decided to write a victim impact statement for my parents' sentencing hearing. Not because I owed them my presence or my words, but because I owed myself the chance to speak truth to the people who had tried to diminish me into nothing. The blank page stared back, intimidating in its emptiness. How could I possibly distill years of systematic starvation, of psychological torture, of having my very existence treated as excessive, into words a judge could understand? I started simply, "My name is Riley Morgan. I am 17 years old. Until 4 months ago, I believed I deserved to disappear." The words flowed after that, not easily but steadily. I wrote about waking up hungry and going to bed hungrier. About learning to ignore the pain in my stomach, the dizziness when I stood too quickly, the way my heart sometimes seemed to forget its rhythm. About hiding food wrappers from school friends who shared their lunches when I forgot mine. I wrote about how hunger became a lens through which I viewed everything, time measured in meals withheld, success defined as needing less, worth calculated in calories. About how my mind grew foggy as my body consumed itself, making school a struggle, friendships impossible, joy a distant memory. And finally, I wrote about what had been stolen from me beyond mere nutrition, confidence, trust, safety, the simple belief that I deserved to exist fully in the world. When I finished, 3 pages lay before me, tear-spotted but powerful. Ms. Winters, who had been quietly reading in the living room, looked up as I gathered the papers. "Finished?" she asked gently. I nodded. "I think I want to read it at the sentencing. I want them to hear it from me." "That's very brave," she said. "Would you like me to go with you?" "Please," I whispered, the simple request still difficult. After years of being told my needs were excessive. The day of the sentencing arrived cool and overcast, the courthouse steps slick with recent rain. Unlike the trial, today's proceedings would be brief, the evidence already presented, the verdict already delivered, only the punishment remaining to be determined. Ms. Winters and I arrived early, meeting Marco in the lobby. He carried a folder containing my statement, which I'd asked him to submit to the judge in case my courage failed at the last moment. "You don't have to do this," he reminded me. "The judge has already seen the evidence. Your parents will be sentenced regardless." "I know," I said. "But I need to do it for me." We entered the courtroom, less crowded than during the trial but still populated with reporters, court officials, and a few familiar faces from the prosecutor's office. My parents sat at the defense table, both dressed soberly, my mother in a high-neck navy dress, my father in the same charcoal suit he'd worn throughout the trial. They looked ordinary. That was perhaps the most disturbing thing. Nothing in their appearance suggested people capable of systematically starving their child. No visible monster lurked behind their carefully composed expressions. I took my seat in the front row beside Ms. Winters, focusing on my breathing the way Dr. Chen had taught me. In, hold, out, repeat. The simple rhythm of survival. The judge entered, and we all rose, then sat at her instruction. After preliminary statements from both attorneys, she asked if I wished to speak. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I approached the podium, unfolding my statement with trembling hands. For the first time since the trial began, I looked directly at my parents. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed but dry. My father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. "My name is Riley Morgan," I began, the words familiar from countless rehearsals. "I am 17 years old. Until 4 months ago, I believed I deserved to disappear." As I read, the courtroom faded until it was just my voice, my truth, filling the space between me and the people who had tried to destroy me. I didn't look up from my paper often, but when I did, I caught glimpses of reaction, the judge removing her glasses, a juror wiping tears, a reporter setting down his pen to simply listen. My parents remained stone-faced, though my mother flinched when I described the combination locks, the food journal, the forced exercising on an empty stomach. "The doctors tell me my body will heal," I concluded, voice steady despite the tears. Tracking silently down my cheeks. "The weight will return. The vitamin deficiencies will resolve. My heart rate will normalize. But some things aren't so easily fixed. How do you repair trust once it's shattered? How do you learn to believe you deserve basic kindness when your own parents taught you that your hunger, your very existence, was excessive? That is the true damage, Your Honor. Not just what they did to my body, but what they did to my belief that I deserve to occupy space in this world at all." I folded my statement, tucked it into my pocket, and returned to my seat without looking at them again. Ms. Winters squeezed my hand as I sat, her palm warm against my still-cold fingers. The judge spoke after a moment of heavy silence. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many forms of child abuse. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not just the physical harm, which was substantial and life-threatening, but the calculated, persistent nature of the abuse. This was not a moment of lost temper or a temporary lapse in judgment. This was years of deliberate deprivation, of psychological manipulation, of using the most basic human need as a weapon against a child in your care." She turned her gaze directly to my parents. "The court sentences Elizabeth and Richard Morgan to 7 years in state prison for child abuse, endangerment, and negligence. Parental rights are permanently terminated. Upon release, neither defendant may contact the victim without explicit written permission. Additionally, restitution in the amount of $157,000 is ordered, to cover medical expenses, therapy, and educational support." The gavel struck with finality. My parents were led away in handcuffs, my mother finally breaking into silent tears, my father's posture rigid with disbelief. It was over. Outside, rain had given way to weak sunshine. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing in the damp, fresh air. Reporters called questions from behind the barricade, cameras flashing, but Marco and Ms. Winters shielded me as we made our way to the parking lot. "How do you feel?" Ms. Winters asked as we drove away. The question was simple, yet I had no simple answer. Relief, yes. Vindication. But also grief for the family I had lost, for the parents who could have been but weren't, for the years I couldn't reclaim. "I feel heard," I said finally. For the first time in years, I feel like someone heard me. That evening, I received a text from Aunt Julie, custody granted. "Ethan says to tell you he's naming his new bedroom plant after you because it was almost dead but now it's growing again." I laughed through sudden tears, Ethan's innocent metaphor striking deeper than he could know. Almost dead but growing. Again. Perhaps that was the most accurate description of where I stood now, in that fragile, hopeful space between survival and revival. The next morning, I woke early and dressed with unusual care, leggings, a loose t-shirt, my hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Ms. Winters drove me across town to a familiar building, its windows reflecting the morning sun, the faded sign. Reading, Harlow Dance Studio, still unchanged after all these years. "I'll pick you up in an hour," she said, squeezing my shoulder gently before driving away. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the studio door, heart hammering. Inside, Ms. Harlow would be waiting. She'd responded immediately to my email, inviting me to come before regular classes started, offering private studio time, to remember what it feels like. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. What if my body had forgotten? What if I was too broken, too damaged, to reclaim this part of myself? The studio smelled exactly as I remembered, wood floor polish, faint sweat, the lavender spray Ms. Harlow used between classes. She stood by the bar, slender and straight as always, her gray-streaked hair in its customary bun. "Riley," she said softly, hands clasped to prevent herself from rushing forward. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, suddenly shy. "Thank you for the invitation. The studio is yours for the next hour. No pressure, no expectations. Just, see what feels right." She moved to the small office off the main room, leaving me alone with the mirrors, the bar, the open floor. For several minutes, I simply stood there, staring at my reflection, still too thin, still recovering, but standing. Present. Alive. I slipped off my shoes, feeling the smooth wood beneath my feet. Muscle memory stirred as I approached the bar, fingers lightly resting on its surface. The simplest ply first, knees bending while maintaining alignment. My body remembered the movement, though it felt strange, rusty, like speaking a language long abandoned. Tentatively, I moved away from the bar, into the center of the room. Arms lifting, legs extending. No music yet, just the rhythm of my breathing, the soft sound of feet on wood. My reflection watched me, this ghost of a dancer trying to remember what joy felt like in motion. I stumbled once, twice, muscles weak from years of deprivation. But I continued, each movement awakening something long dormant. Not skill, that would take time to rebuild, but connection. Body to mind, present to past, brokenness to possibility. When Ms. Harlow returned an hour later, she found me seated in the center of the floor, breathless, tear-streaked, but smiling. "I remember," I told her simply. She nodded, understanding the significance. "You never truly forgot. It was just waiting for you to be ready." 2 days later, I stood in Ms. Winters' kitchen helping prepare dinner when my phone chimed. With an email notification. The sender's name made my heart skip, Westlake Memorial Adolescent Program. During my hospitalization, one of the nurses had mentioned their peer support initiative, recovered patients returning to speak with those still struggling, offering hope from the other side of trauma. I'd applied on impulse, not expecting anything to come of it. "Ms. Winters," I called, voice shaking slightly. "They want me to interview for the peer support program. They think my story might help other kids." She looked up from the salad she was preparing, her expression softening. "Of course they do. You're living proof that survival is possible." "But I'm not." I gestured vaguely at myself, the still visible evidence of what had been done. To me, I'm not fully recovered. I'm not some perfect success story. "That's exactly why you'd be perfect," she countered. "Recovery isn't a destination, Riley. It's a journey. Those kids don't need someone who's fixed, they need someone still walking the path who can show them it's possible to keep going." I stared at the email, trying to imagine myself speaking to other teenagers still raw from their own traumas. What could I possibly offer them? Then I remembered the book Ms. Winters had lent me, the one that had named what I'd experienced. That had pulled shapeless darkness into definable patterns. How powerful it had been to simply know I wasn't alone, that others had walked this path before me. Perhaps that was enough, to be living proof that survival was possible. Not perfect healing, not complete recovery, but the simple, powerful fact of continuing to exist, to reclaim space, to grow despite everything designed to diminish me. I typed a quick reply accepting the interview, then set my phone aside, returning to the simple act of chopping vegetables for dinner. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new steps on this uncertain path toward healing. But tonight, in this kitchen with its unlocked refrigerator and freely offered food, I allowed myself to acknowledge how far I'd already come. Almost dead but growing again. Like Ethan's plant, like the spring flowers pushing through frozen ground, like hope after despair. Not an ending but a beginning, fragile and tenacious and absolutely determined to live. 3 months later, I stood in front of the floor-length mirror in Ms. Winter's guest room, my room now, hardly recognizing the person staring back. My hair had regained its shine, falling in soft waves past my shoulders. My face had filled out, cheekbones no longer razor-sharp beneath too tight skin. The dress I wore, a simple blue sundress bought specifically for today, actually fit, no longer hanging from my frame like clothes on a scarecrow. "Riley? You about ready?" Ms. Winters called from downstairs. "We should leave in 15 minutes to beat traffic." "Almost," I called back, giving my reflection one last assessment. Today marked my first speaking engagement at Westlake Memorial's Adolescent Recovery Program. After 2 interviews and a training session, they'd invited me to share my story with current patients, teenagers struggling with their own traumas, their own paths to healing. The idea still terrified me. What wisdom could I possibly offer when I remained so firmly in the middle of my own recovery? What right did I have to position myself as some kind of success story when I still woke from nightmares of locked refrigerators, still sometimes struggled to eat without calculating invisible penalties? Yet something Dr. Chen had said during our last session kept returning to me: healing isn't about reaching some perfect end state. It's about reclaiming your story, one word at a time. Today, I would reclaim more of mine by speaking it aloud to others who might recognize pieces of themselves in it. Downstairs, Ms. Winters waited by the door, car keys in hand. In the months since the trial, our relationship had evolved from the careful distance of new foster placement to something approaching family. Not mother-daughter, that word carried too much weight, too many shadows, but something uniquely ours. Mentor and mentee. Survivor and guide. 2 people building trust brick by steady brick. "Nervous?" she asked as we drove toward the hospital. "Terrified," I admitted. "What if I freeze up? What if they don't connect with anything I say?" She glanced over, eyes kind behind her glasses. "Then you'll learn from it and try again differently next time. But Riley, your story matters precisely because it's still unfolding. These kids don't need perfection, they need possibility." The Adolescent Recovery Wing occupied the 4th floor of Westlake Memorial's East Building. I'd spent 6 weeks here after my initial emergency stabilization, in a room with sky blue walls and a window overlooking the hospital garden. The corridor still smelled the same, antiseptic with undertones of industrial cleaner and the faint sweetness of the apple juice they served at snack time. Nurse Amara met us at the nurse's station, her familiar smile easing some of my anxiety. She'd been one of my favorites during my stay, firm but never harsh, especially during the difficult refeeding process when my body initially rejected the nutrition it desperately needed. "Riley." She embraced me gently. "Look at you. Standing tall and strong. I'm so proud." "Not sure about the strong part," I confessed. "I'm pretty nervous." "Everyone is their first time," she assured me. "We have 8 patients joining today's session. Mixed backgrounds but all between 14 and 17. Dr. Wilson will introduce you, then it's all yours for about 20 minutes. Questions after if you're comfortable." She led us to a small community room where chairs had been arranged in a circle. Dr. Wilson, the program director, greeted us warmly, reviewing the session format while we waited for the patients to arrive. Ms. Winters squeezed my hand before taking a seat against the wall, present but giving me space to stand on my own. I fingered the note cards in my pocket, though I'd practically memorized my talking points over the past week. The patients filed in gradually, some walking confidently, others shuffling with the characteristic caution of those still physically weak. A tall girl with a cascade of dark curls. A lanky boy whose wrists still bore the telltale marks of restraints. A petite blonde whose eyes darted nervously around the room, assessing exits. 8 teenagers, each carrying their own invisible burdens. "Good morning, everyone," Dr. Wilson began once they were seated. "Today we're fortunate to have Riley Morgan with us. Riley was a patient here earlier this year and has graciously agreed to share some of her journey with us. Please welcome her." Their applause was polite, if reserved. I stepped forward, heart hammering so loudly I was certain they could hear it. "Hi," I began, voice steadier than I expected. "I'm Riley. 4 months ago, I was sitting where you are now, wondering if my life would ever feel normal again." I paused, looking at their faces, some curious, some skeptical, all carrying that particular exhaustion unique to those fighting battles most people never see. "My story begins when I was 14, I continued. That's when my parents began restricting my food, convinced they were helping me, teaching me self-control. By the time I collapsed at school 3 years later, I weighed 92 pounds and believed I deserved to disappear." The room grew still. A girl in the front row, thin with limp brown hair, nodded almost imperceptibly. I didn't share every detail. Some parts of my story remained too raw, too private. But I told them about the locks, the food journal, the calculated isolation, about believing I was the problem, about the long, slow process of recognizing that what had happened wasn't normal or deserved. "The hardest part of recovery hasn't been physical," I admitted. "My body is healing, I've gained 18 pounds, my heart rate is normal, my labs are improving. But rebuilding my relationship with food, with trust, with my own worth? That's the real work, and it's ongoing." I shared small victories. Eating a meal without mental calculations, speaking up in therapy when something felt wrong, learning to identify hunger as a legitimate need rather than a character flaw. I told them about returning to dance, about reconnecting with old friends, about the first time I opened a refrigerator without asking permission. "I'm not standing here as someone who has it all figured out," I concluded. "I still have hard days. I still fight the voices that tell me I'm too much, that I take up too much space. But I'm learning that healing isn't a straight line. It's messy and uneven, and sometimes it feels like you're moving backward. The important thing is that you keep going, even when it's just tiny steps." When I finished, the room remained quiet for a moment. Then the brown-haired girl raised her hand. "How did you start trusting people again?" she asked softly. "After what they did?" The question pierced straight to one of my deepest struggles. "Honestly? Very slowly, and not all at once. I started with one person, my social worker, Ms. Winters." I gestured toward where she sat. I didn't trust her immediately, but she was consistent. She never made food a weapon or a reward. She gave me space to have feelings without punishing me for them. Eventually, I realized that not everyone would hurt me the way my parents did. Another hand rose, the lanky boy with marked wrists. "Do you ever feel angry? Like, really angry? About what happened?" "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "Anger has been part of my healing. For a long time, I wasn't allowed to feel angry. That was labeled as being dramatic or attention-seeking. Learning that my anger is valid, that it's a natural response to injustice, has been important. The trick is not letting it consume me." More questions followed, about nightmares, about school, about how to handle well-meaning people who didn't understand. I answered as honestly as I could, neither sugarcoating the difficulties nor painting recovery as impossible. When the session ended, several patients approached to speak privately. A girl named Jade told me she'd been hospitalized. For similar reasons, her grandmother had been controlling her food as punishment for perceived misbehavior. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," she whispered. "She's so nice to everyone else." "I believe you," I told her firmly. "Your experience is real, no matter how well they hide it from others." The relief in her eyes reflected back what I'd needed so desperately at her stage, simple validation that I wasn't crazy, that what had happened was real and wrong. As we left the hospital, Ms. Winters was uncharacteristically quiet. When we reached the car, she turned to me, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "What you did in there, it matters, Riley. You might have changed lives today." The weight of her words settled over me. Maybe this was part of healing too, not just receiving help but offering it. Not just being seen but helping others feel seen. "Thank you for bringing me," I said simply. "I'd like to come back, if they'll have me." The following week brought another milestone, my first day back at Riverside High School since my collapse 5 months earlier. After discussions with Marco, Ms. Winters, and the school administration, we'd decided I would complete my junior year through a combination of in-person classes and independent study, with accommodations for therapy appointments and ongoing recovery needs. The morning of my return, I stood in the kitchen nibbling toast while Ms. Winters packed my lunch, another new normal that still felt revolutionary in its simplicity. "Remember, you can call me anytime if it gets overwhelming," she reminded me, adding an extra granola bar to my lunch bag. "Half-days are perfectly fine for the first week." "I know," I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "I'll be okay." The truth was, returning to school terrified me almost as much as the hospital speaking engagement had. Riverside High had been the site of so much of my silent suffering, classes missed due to dizziness, lunch periods spent hiding in bathroom stalls, PE classes endured despite dangerous weakness. Now I would return as someone different, the girl from the news stories, the one whose parents were in prison, the walking embodiment of a tragedy everyone had witnessed from the sidelines. Ms. Winters dropped me off at the main entrance, where Mrs. Campbell, the guidance counselor, waited to escort me inside. The hallways were mercifully empty, first period already underway. "We've adjusted your schedule as requested," Mrs. Campbell explained as we walked toward her office. "Fewer classes to start, free period before lunch for rest if needed, and you'll meet with me every Wednesday to check in. Your teachers have all been briefed." "Briefed on what exactly?" I asked, suddenly concerned about how much of my personal situation had been shared. "Just that you're returning after medical leave and may need certain accommodations," she assured me. "The details remain private unless you choose to share them." My modified schedule meant starting with AP Literature, a small class with Mrs. Bennett, the English teacher who had first noticed something was wrong. When I entered the classroom, conversation momentarily halted before resuming at a slightly higher pitch. I slid into an empty desk near the window, keeping my eyes forward. Mrs. Bennett simply nodded in greeting, continuing her discussion of Toni Morrison without drawing attention to my arrival. I was grateful for her discretion, for the chance to simply be a student rather than a spectacle. When the bell rang, she asked me to stay behind for a moment. "It's good to see you, Riley," she said once we were alone. "How are you feeling about being back?" "Honestly? Like everyone's staring, even when they're not." She smiled sympathetically. "That will fade. New dramas will emerge, as they always do in high school. But if anyone gives you trouble, or if things get overwhelming, my door is always open." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "For that, and for noticing. Back when, you know." Her expression softened. "I wish I'd done more than just notice. I should have pushed harder when you brushed off my concerns." "You couldn't have known," I assured her. "They were very convincing." The rest of the morning passed in a similar fashion, curious glances quickly averted, whispered conversations that stopped when I approached, teachers making careful eye contact to ensure I was following along. By lunch period, the hyper-awareness of being observed had left me exhausted. Rather than brave the cafeteria, I headed to the courtyard, finding a quiet bench beneath an oak tree. I opened my lunch bag, still marveling at the simple freedom of having food readily available. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up to find Zoe standing there, her own lunch tray balanced in one hand. In the months since our coffee shop reunion, we'd been slowly rebuilding our friendship, text messages, occasional weekend meetups, careful steps towards something new. "Please," I gestured to the empty space beside me. She sat, arranging her tray between us. "How's the first day going?" "About as awkward as expected," I admitted. "Lots of staring, not much actual talking." "Want me to glare at them?" "I've been working on my intimidating face." She demonstrated, scrunching her features into an exaggerated scowl that made me laugh despite myself. "Very frightening. You should consider a career in security." "Noted." She nudged her container of strawberries toward me. "Trade you for one of those chips?" The casual offer, food shared between friends, no hidden agenda, no calculation, felt wonderfully normal. I passed her a handful of chips, taking a strawberry in return. "Jason Chin keeps asking about you," she mentioned casually. "I think he might ask you to prom." "Prom? That's months away." "Jason plans ahead. It's his most annoying quality." "Well, that and his terrible puns." The conversation drifted to safer topics, classes, college applications, the drama of who was dating whom. For a few precious minutes, I was just another junior navigating the complicated social landscape of high school, not a survivor of something terrible. The afternoon brought more classes, more whispers, more careful navigation of a world that now viewed me through the lens of my tragedy. By the time Ms. Winters picked me up, I was drained but standing. "How was it?" she asked as I buckled my seatbelt. "Exhausting. But possible." I leaned back against the headrest. "I think I can do this." That evening, I received a text from Dr. Wilson at the hospital. "The feedback from your talk was overwhelmingly positive. 2 patients specifically mentioned your story helped them open up in group therapy today. Would you consider coming back monthly?" Something warm unfurled in my chest, not pride exactly, but purpose. The possibility that my worst experiences might somehow help others navigate their own darkness. I typed back a simple response, "Yes. Just tell me when." The weeks fell into a new rhythm: school 3 days a week, therapy twice, dance studio on Saturdays, hospital speaking engagements monthly. Small steps forward, occasional steps back, but movement nonetheless. Ethan visited 1 weekend a month, Aunt Julie driving him down from Columbus where they now lived. Our relationship was evolving too, less the protective older sister and frightened younger brother, more equals sharing experiences of our new normal. I joined soccer, he announced during his October visit, kicking a ball between his feet in Ms. Winter's backyard. I'm not very good yet, but coach says I have potential. That's awesome, I said, watching him dribble awkwardly across the grass. Mom and Dad never let you play sports, did they? He shook his head. Dad said they were a waste of time. Aunt Julie says I can try anything I want as long as I keep my grades up. The mention of our parents no longer brought the immediate tension it once had. We were learning to speak of them matter-of-factly, acknowledging their presence in our history without allowing them to dominate our present. How's the new therapist? I asked, accepting the ball as he passed it to me. Dr. Rachel's cool. She lets me build stuff with Legos while we talk. Says it helps me focus. He shrugged. I guess it works. I can talk about Mom and Dad without getting that weird feeling in my stomach now. I marveled at his resilience, his ability to process and adapt. Children are remarkably capable of healing when given the right support, a fact I clung to. On my darker days. What about you? He asked. Still doing the hospital talks? I nodded. It helps, somehow. Turns all the awful stuff into something useful, you know? He considered this, head tilted thoughtfully. Like recycling, but for bad experiences. The analogy startled a laugh from me. Exactly like that. Very eco-friendly of me. As fall deepened into winter, my body continued its slow healing. Dr. Chen had warned me that recovery wouldn't be linear, and she was right. Some weeks brought noticeable improvements, energy returning, concentration sharpening, the mirror reflecting someone increasingly familiar. Other weeks felt like stagnation or even regression, old fears resurfacing, old habits calling seductively. During one particularly difficult therapy session in November, I finally voiced the fear that had been haunting me. What if I'm never fully recovered? I asked Dr. Chen. What if part of me is always broken by what they did? She set down her notepad, considering me thoughtfully. Riley, I want to challenge the idea that healing means returning to some perfect, before, state. You went through something profoundly traumatic during crucial developmental years. It has changed you, not just physically but emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. That sounds like you're saying I'll always be damaged, I said, voice small. No, she corrected gently. I'm saying you'll always be shaped by your experiences, as we all are. The goal isn't to erase what happened or pretend it didn't affect you. The goal is integration, acknowledging the trauma as part of your story without allowing it to define your entire narrative. How do I do that? You're already doing it. Every time you eat without calculating calories, every time you speak your truth at the hospital, every time you allow yourself to need things and ask for them, you're integrating. You're saying this happened to me, and I'm still here, still growing, still becoming. Her words stayed with me long after the session ended, through dinner with the Winters, through homework at the kitchen table, through my evening routine. Integration, not erasure. Carrying my history without being crushed by it. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in weeks, maybe healing isn't about becoming who I was before. Maybe it's about becoming someone new, someone who knows darkness intimately but chooses to walk toward light anyway. Someone who understands hunger in all its forms and therefore recognizes nourishment as sacred. Someone whose broken places have been mended with gold like those Japanese pottery pieces, stronger at the seams, beautiful because of the repair. Not despite it. The next morning, an email arrived from Westlake Memorial with an unusual request. They were organizing a conference on adolescent trauma recovery and wanted me to speak, not just to patients this time, but to medical professionals, social workers, and educators. They want me to help train people who work with kids like me, I told Ms. Winters, staring at the screen in disbelief. They think my perspective could help improve treatment approaches. Of course they do, she said simply. You've seen both sides, the harm and the healing. That's valuable insight. My finger hovered over the reply button, uncertainty warring with a strange new feeling, confidence. Not the brash certainty of someone who knows everything, but the quiet assurance of someone who knows her own truth and recognizes its worth. I clicked reply and typed 2 words, I'm in. Preparing for the conference became my focus over the next few weeks. With help from Dr. Chen and Ms. Winters, I developed a presentation that balanced personal narrative with practical insights, what had helped my recovery, what had hindered it, what I wished professionals had known or done differently. The night before the conference, I stood in my room practicing my opening lines when my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Hello? I answered cautiously. Riley? It's Jade. From the hospital group. The voice was tentative, familiar. Jade, how are you? How did you get my number? Dr. Wilson gave it to me. She said it would be okay since I'm being discharged tomorrow. I wanted to thank you for coming to speak that day. For saying what happened to you wasn't your fault. Something caught in my throat. You're being discharged? That's wonderful. Yeah, she said, voice stronger now. I'm going to live with my aunt. She believes me about my grandmother. Says no one will ever use food to control me again. I'm so glad, Jade. Really. The thing is, she continued, they're asking me if I want to do what you do. Talk to other kids someday, when I'm ready. I wasn't sure if I should, but then I thought about how hearing your story made me feel less crazy, less alone. So I think I'm going to try. A circle completing, a light passing forward. I think that's a beautiful idea. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, marveling at how far we'd both come from those hospital rooms with their monitored meals and vital sign checks. Not fully healed, perhaps never fully healed, but moving forward, finding purpose. In pain, refusing to be defined solely by what had been done to us. The next morning dawned clear and cold, winter sunlight glinting off frost-covered lawns. I dressed carefully in clothes Ms. Winters had helped me select, professional but not severe, polished but still appropriate for my age. My reflection showed someone I was still getting to know, not the starved girl from the hospital photos, but not quite the carefree 14-year-old from before either. Someone new, shaped by both darkness and light. The conference center hummed with activity when we arrived, medical professionals in business casual, social workers with sensible shoes and compassionate eyes, educators clutching coffee cups and comparing notes. I was scheduled as the closing speaker, my perspective meant to ground the day's more clinical discussions in lived reality. Throughout the morning, I sat in on various sessions, absorbing information about trauma-informed care, attachment theory, the neurobiology of starvation. So much science explaining what I'd experienced in my body and mind, naming the invisible wounds my parents had inflicted alongside the visible ones. When it was finally my turn to speak, I approached the podium with steady steps, my notes crisp in my hands. The audience quieted, professional faces turned expectantly toward me, the former patient, the survivor, the expert on an experience they could only study from the outside. Good afternoon, I began. My name is Riley Morgan. At 17, my parents locked the refrigerator and called me dramatic when I collapsed at school. They thought I'd keep quiet like always. Then the ER doctor stormed into the courtroom, photos in hand, and testified. Severe malnutrition, he said. My parents' faces went paper white. The room was utterly silent now, captivated. But my story doesn't end with that diagnosis, or even with justice in a courtroom. It continues with something much harder, much more complex, the daily work of reclaiming my body, my voice, and my future from those who tried to diminish me into nothing. For the next 30 minutes, I shared my journey, not just the dramatic moments captured in hospital photos and court transcripts, but the quiet victories that marked real healing. The first time I ate without permission. The day I returned to dance. The moment I realized my hunger was not a character flaw but simply my body communicating a legitimate need. The significance of the gesture caught in my throat, the key. Symbolic of everything my parents had taken from me. Access. Agency. Belonging. Security. I don't know what to say, I managed finally. You don't have to say anything, Roy assured me. Just know the door is always open, the refrigerator is never locked, and your room stays your room, even when you're away at college. A home without conditions. A place where I belonged simply because I existed, not because I performed or conformed or diminished myself to earn acceptance. The concept still felt revolutionary. Thank you, I whispered, closing my fingers around the key for everything. The next morning, I woke early, unable to sleep as thoughts of the future hummed through me. Northwestern's freshman orientation was still months away, but preparations had already begun, housing forms submitted, course catalogs studied, packing lists drafted and redrafted. Restless energy propelled me out of bed and into running. Clothes. In the past year, I'd cautiously reclaimed physical activity, working with Dr. Chen and a sports nutritionist to develop a healthy relationship with exercise, no longer punishment or purging but simply movement for joy, for strength, for the quiet pleasure of a body functioning as it should. The neighborhood slept as I jogged through familiar streets, past houses where my former classmates were likely still dreaming beneath graduation decorations. 3 miles at an easy pace, heart steady, breath controlled. Another reclamation. Running because I could, because it felt good, because my body was finally strong enough to carry me forward rather than collapsing beneath the weight of starvation. When I returned, sweaty but energized, the house was stirring. Ms. Winters at the coffee maker, Roy retrieving the newspaper from the front step, Chairman Meow winding hopefully between ankles in pursuit of breakfast. Morning, sunshine, MS. Winters greeted me. Sleep well? Not really, I admitted, filling a glass with water. Too many thoughts about what comes next. She nodded understanding. That's normal. Transitions are always challenging, even positive ones. I'm excited about Northwestern, I said, leaning against the counter. Just also terrified. What if I can't handle the pressure? What if I relapse when I'm stressed about finals? What if you stumble sometimes but keep going anyway? She interjected gently. What if you build a support system there like you have here? What if you discover strengths you don't even know you have yet? Her reframing paused the spiral of anxious questions. I suppose those are equally possible. I conceded. More than possible, she corrected. Given your track record, I'd say likely. After breakfast, I spent the morning sorting through my belongings, deciding what would come to college with me, what would stay in my room here, what could be donated. The process felt symbolic, carefully evaluating what to carry forward, what to leave behind, what to release entirely. In the bottom drawer of my desk, I found the journal I'd kept during those early days of recovery. I hadn't written in it for months, having graduated to less structured reflections as the acute phase of healing gave way to something more integrated. I opened it to a random page, my handwriting from a year ago jumping out. Bad day. Couldn't finish lunch. Kept hearing Mom's voice calling me greedy. Dr. Chen says to name the voice as eating disorder thoughts, instead of my own, but it's hard to separate. Sometimes I think I'll never be normal about food. The raw vulnerability of those early entries struck me, the pain so fresh, the future so uncertain. Flipping forward through the pages, I could trace the gradual but unmistakable arc of healing. Dance class today. Made it through a full hour without getting dizzy. Ms. Harlow says my technique is coming back. Found myself smiling at my reflection instead of counting ribs. And later, went to Jason's family dinner. His mom served pasta and I ate without counting. Bites or feeling guilty. Laughed so hard my stomach hurt, the good kind of hurt, from joy not hunger. And finally, one of the last entries, I think I'm starting to understand what Dr. Chen means about integration. The trauma doesn't disappear, but it becomes part of a larger story instead of the whole story. Some days I still struggle, but those days don't define me anymore. They're just days. I closed the journal, running my fingers over its worn cover. Perhaps I would bring it to college after all, not as an active document but as a testament to how far I'd come, a reminder on difficult days that healing, while never perfect or complete, was possible. My phone chimed with a message from Marco. Got a minute to talk? Have some news about your parents. My stomach tightened automatically. Though legally severed from them after their sentencing, I still received occasional updates through the proper channels, usually routine information about their incarceration status or legal proceedings. I called Marco immediately, moving to sit on my bed as the phone rang. Riley, thanks for calling back so quickly, he answered. What's happening? I asked, bracing myself. Nothing urgent, he assured me. But I wanted you to hear this from me. Your parents have applied for a sentence modification based on participation in rehabilitation programs. It's standard procedure after completing certain requirements. I exhaled slowly. What does that mean exactly? If granted, it could potentially reduce their sentences by up to a year, Marco explained. But I want to be very clear, even if approved, they would still serve a minimum of 4 years. And the no-contact order remains in effect regardless. Do I need to do anything? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Not unless you want to. As the victim, you have the right to submit a statement to the review board about how you feel about the modification. But it's completely your choice. After hanging up, I sat motionless, processing this unexpected ripple from the past. The thought of my parents being released even a day earlier than their original sentence stirred complicated emotions, not fear exactly, but a vague uneasiness, a reminder that their story continued parallel to mine even as our paths had permanently diverged. Ms. Winters found me still sitting there minutes later, gently knocking on my open door. Everything okay? You look troubled. I explained Marco's call, watching her face for reaction. I don't know how I feel about it, I admitted. Or if I should submit a statement. She sat beside me, thoughtful. What would you want to say? If you did write something? The question crystallized feelings I hadn't fully articulated. I'd want them to know I'm okay. Not because of them, but despite them. That I'm building a life they tried to starve out of existence. That sounds like a powerful statement, she observed. But would it matter? Would they even hear it? She considered this seriously. I can't answer that. People who abuse others, especially their own children, often have extraordinary capacity for self-deception. They might twist your words to fit their narrative, or they might truly reflect on the harm they caused. You can't control their reception, only your expression. Maybe that's enough, I said slowly. just to say my piece, whether or not it lands. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk with a fresh notebook, pen hovering over blank paper. How to address the people who had given me life, then systematically tried to diminish it? What words could possibly bridge the chasm between us, not to rebuild a relationship that was irreparably broken, but simply to speak my truth one final time? Dear Elizabeth and Richard Morgan, I began, using their formal names rather than Mom and Dad, titles they had forfeited through their actions. I'm writing regarding your sentence modification request. As the person most affected by your actions, I have the right to provide input to the review board. I want to be clear. I am not opposed to rehabilitation. If you have genuinely confronted the harm you caused and are working to ensure you never harm another person, that is important work. But rehabilitation isn't primarily about reducing sentences, it's about transforming patterns of behavior that caused damage. For 3 years, you systematically starved me, convinced me my basic needs were excessive, and isolated me from anyone who might have helped. When I collapsed at school with organ damage from malnutrition, you called me dramatic. You weaponized the most fundamental human need, food, against your own child. The consequences of your actions didn't end with your sentencing. I continue to deal with the physical and psychological aftermath daily. Trust doesn't come easily. Food remains complicated. Relationships require careful navigation. These are not complaints but realities I've learned to manage as I build a life you tried to prevent me from having. Despite everything, I am thriving. I graduated with honors. I'm attending Northwestern University in the fall to study psychology, specializing in adolescent trauma recovery. I speak regularly at hospitals to help other young survivors find their voices. I dance again. I laugh again. I eat without counting calories or fearing punishment. I'm not writing to offer forgiveness or closure. Those are not mine to give at this point, if ever. I'm writing to make clear that your actions have not defined me, though they have undeniably shaped me. Whatever the review board decides about your sentence modification, know this: I am more than what you did to me. I am more than the hunger you inflicted. I am whole in ways you never anticipated. Riley Morgan. I read over the letter twice, making small adjustments. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, neither vengeful nor forgiving, simply truthful. Whether I ultimately decided to submit it to the review board or not, writing it had clarified something important within me. The days after graduation blurred into a pleasant routine of preparation and celebration. Ethan stayed for a week, the two of us exploring the city like tourists, visiting museums we'd never been allowed to see as children, trying restaurants our parents would have deemed excessive, taking silly photos in public park photo booths. I'm going to miss you when you go to college, he admitted as we shared ice cream cones on the riverfront. At 14, he balanced precariously between childhood and adolescence, sometimes the playful brother I remembered, sometimes surprisingly insightful beyond his years. I'll miss you too, Squirt, I said, nudging his shoulder with mine. But I'll be home for holidays and some weekends. And we can video chat whenever you want. It won't be the same, he pointed out pragmatically. But I'm still happy for you. Aunt Julie says you're living the life you were meant to have before, you know. Before our parents tried to starve the life out of me. The unspoken reality. We both understood. What about you? I asked, genuinely curious. What kind of life do you think you were meant to have? He considered this seriously, licking melting ice cream from his fingers. I think I want to be a coach someday. Or maybe a teacher. Someone who helps kids figure stuff out. I smiled, recognizing the seeds of his natural empathy beginning to shape into purpose. You'd be amazing at that. Do you think? He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Do you think what happened to us will always be the biggest thing about us? Like, will we always be those kids whose parents went to jail? The question cut to the heart of something I'd been wrestling with myself. I think it will always be part of our story, I said carefully. But not the whole story, and maybe not even the most important part eventually. What's the most important part then? I looked at my brother, resilient, kind despite everything, already showing signs of the good man he would become. What we choose to do with the rest of our chapters. How we write our own endings. The week before I left for Northwestern, Ms. Winters organized a small gathering, not quite a party, but a sending-off celebration with the people who had become my support system. Jason and his parents, Zoe and her mother, Marco, Ms. Harlow, Dr. Chen, even a few of the nurses from Westlake Memorial who had cared for me during those fragile early days of recovery. The backyard was strung with fairy lights, a buffet table laden with favorite dishes contributed by each guest. As twilight settled over the gathering, Ms. Winters clinked a spoon against her glass, drawing everyone's attention. If I could have a moment, she began. We're here to celebrate Riley's next chapter, but I think it's worth acknowledging the extraordinary journey that's brought her to this point. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, still uncomfortable sometimes with being the center of attention. Many of you in this garden played crucial roles in that journey, she continued. You believed her when others didn't. You supported her when she needed it most. You helped her reclaim pieces of herself that others tried to take away. Around the circle, faces softened with emotion, Dr. Chen nodding slightly, Marco wiping suspiciously at his eye, Ms. Harlow reaching for my hand. But the true architect of this remarkable recovery stands before you, Ms. Winters said, turning toward me. Riley, you have shown us all what courage looks like, not the dramatic kind that makes headlines, but the quiet, daily kind that gets up each morning and chooses to heal, to grow, to help others even while still healing yourself. She raised her glass. To Riley, survivor, teacher, dancer, student, friend, sister, and so much more. Northwestern doesn't know how lucky they're about to be. As glasses raised around the circle, I felt something shift within me, a settling, a certainty. A recognition that while the journey wasn't over, a significant milestone had been reached. I was not defined by what had been done to me, but by how I had rebuilt myself afterward, by the community I had gathered, by the purpose I had discovered in the ruins. The morning I left for Northwestern dawned clear and promising, my packed bags lined neatly by the door. Ms. Winters and Roy would drive me to campus, help set up my dorm room, say goodbye until Thanksgiving break. Before leaving, I walked alone through the house that had become my sanctuary, touching familiar objects, memorizing the quality of light through kitchen windows, the specific creak of the third stair, the scent of Roy's coffee lingering in the air. In my room, still my room, key safely tucked in my wallet, I paused before the full-length mirror. The reflection showed someone transformed from the skeletal girl in hospital photos, healthy weight restored, eyes clear and direct, posture straight with hard-won confidence. But the most significant changes weren't visible on the surface. They lived in the quiet certainty that I deserved nourishment in all its forms. In the voice that had learned to speak truth to power. In the boundaries I now maintained without apology. In the helping hand I extended to others still finding their way out of darkness. My parents had tried to convince me I was too much, that my hunger, my needs, my very existence were excessive. Their greatest failure, and my greatest triumph, was discovering just how wrong they had been. I wasn't too much. I was exactly enough. As I turned to leave the room, sunlight caught the silver frame on my bedside table, a photograph taken at graduation, surrounded by my chosen family, laughing with unguarded joy. Not a perfect ending, but a perfect moment in an ongoing story. My story. Reclaimed, rewritten, continuing. Ready? Ms. Winters called from downstairs. I took one last look around the room, at the life I had built from the ashes of what was taken. Ready, I called back, meaning it completely. The journey ahead would bring new challenges, new growth, new opportunities to transform pain into purpose. But I would face them standing firmly in the truth my parents had tried to starve away. I deserved to exist fully in this world. I deserved to be seen, to be heard, to take up space without apology. I deserved to hunger, for knowledge, for connection, for justice, for joy. And nothing, not locked refrigerators or cruel words or years of systematic diminishment, could ever convince me otherwise again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.